the them versus us communities feel great in the moment until you realize there's no actual end game for everyone to be happy and healthy and wealthy and all the things. But you get recognition from it, which is a human need. There's a level of identity that gets built around having that problem. It's a way to start conversations with people, which then means that we're more part of the tribe, especially if we gossip and we talk negatively about things, because it's the easiest thing for humans to relate on. Every single human has, at some level, a core belief that they're not good enough or they're not worthy. Even the worst among us on society standards have the same belief. And when we have problems, or when we have relationship breakdowns, or we lose all our money, we're just confirming and proving a limiting belief, which is, again, safety for the brain. And so when we can start to become aware of our secondary gain that we get from our problem, we can ask the question, do I want that attention, recognition, identity, community, conversation, or would I prefer to do things differently, heal my body, resolve my relationship challenges, make more money, and experience that side of it? Because you get all of those things when you solve your problem as well. I can tell you right now, they're much better tribes and communities and conversations. A lot of the times we will fight and argue for our excuses. We will fight and we will argue for our problem being so big that it's unsolvable. It's unlike anyone else's. And I've been that person. Except there is no problem that cannot be solved in some way, shape, or form. And so rather than fighting or arguing for our problems, because whatever we fight and argue for, we get to keep, because we're just solidifying the program. Can we ask ourselves, do we want to be right? Do we want to win the argument, or do we want to be happy? Do we want to be right, or do we want to be happy? Before you listen to today's episode, I'd like to ask you a huge favor. So many of you listen to this podcast, but you're not yet subscribed, potentially on any platform. The more of you that subscribe and share this with your friends, the more that we can bring more content to you, more knowledge and wisdom and amazing guests. And right now, this is my passion project. So I'm not making any money from it. And it does take a lot of my time amidst supporting my incredible clients inside the Lovely Radical Academy. And I get so many messages of lives that are being changed because of having access to this exciting knowledge and support and conversation and community. And by simply clicking a button to subscribe and to share, you're part of that impact, which is pretty cool. So take a moment now, hit subscribe, share this with your friends, and I hope you enjoy today's episode. Hey everyone. So today's episode, we're going to be diving into some really powerful concepts for the mind that are really great to know as you move through a self-development journey or a self-love or self-exploration, whatever you want to call it. We've gotten really good at doing all the self stuff, right? And as you move through that and peel back the layers of your own identity, or perhaps peel off the layers that have been piled on top of your own identity, these can be some really powerful concepts to have grasped, because as we're getting to know our own mind, we can start to realize that a lot of our own mind isn't even our own mind. It's just programs that we've learned along the way. And when we learn what's there, and then we perhaps learn what we'd like to be there instead, there can be a bit of a push-pull that happens in the process of creating the new programs and making them strong enough that they win against the old ones. And as the mind always does, as your brain is always doing, it's trying to keep you safe. And so it's always going to reach for the thing that's as familiar as possible, because that's easy, it doesn't stress you out too much, and it keeps you in the familiar, which to your brain is safety. However, if the program that it's reaching for is keeping you stuck, then we need to start playing with stacking a new program. And in the process of that, there can be a bit of really creative storytelling that happens in the mind in order to keep us in the old program. And so I wanted to start with sharing a story about the first concept, which is called delete, distort, generalize. And this is essentially based on the fact that we're always going to be deleting, distorting, and generalizing the data that we consume, whether it's in our interactions with others, in our online conversations, in just viewing the world and moving through it. We're constantly taking in data, millions and millions of data points a day, and the brain needs to sort that. And the point of delete, distort, generalize is that it's going to sort it as easily as possible to, I actually don't need that. I'm going to make that look like that. I'm going to make that go in that box, to make things easier for us, to make things less stressful for us so that our bodies can function and stay alive. However, this is a problem when we start to take tiny bits of data and allow our mind to work on that autopilot, to box it away, to put it in containers with old belief systems because it maybe looks a little bit like them or sounds a little bit like them or feels a little bit like them, but it's not actually them. And we can talk ourselves out of all the things that we actually want because we've deleted, we've either distorted the information or we've generalized it. We've put it in a box of it's generally that because it looks like it or seems like it or feels like it or sounds like it, just to save us time, just to save us energy, to keep us alive. That's what the brain's doing. So it's kind of awesome. And when we can gear it towards the things you actually want, it can be more fun. And an example of this that I'll use personally, I am working with a fabulous health coach, and we have been just pulling apart everything that I do with my health, which was already pretty fabulous compared to most people. I've spent the last 5 years learning about gut health and hormones and all the things to prepare my body for, fertility and just getting older and all the things. And I was doing pretty great. And then we decided to go deeper. And so we've been peeling back all of these layers, and I was getting to more and more deeper resistance programs that have been buried forever that maybe I never even knew were there, programs from relationships, programs from other health practitioners, programs from my childhood. And as we dig deeper into those programs, the brain starts freaking out because we're trying to change things, we're trying to challenge things in our unconsciousness, but that in itself is unsafe. And so the brain's going to get so creative. Like, our mind is really so creative in the stories that it can come up with to keep us safe. And it can be really convincing. And when we can slow ourselves down enough and have a known foundation in self to come back to when we are running a story, to go, wait, is this story real? Is this story serving me? And is this story getting me to where I want to go? And so the example is, I've been working with this beautiful coach, and she's been getting me to do a whole bunch of things. And it felt like my health was getting worse, even though I do have the awareness that when you make changes, especially drastic ones, the body's going to go through a detox when it starts to get lots of new nutrients and all the things. And I had challenged her on a couple of things that she'd asked me to do, and said, I don't really want to do it that way. Like, I want to do it this way. And, my body is telling me I should be doing it this way. It seems to be responding better if I do it this way, which the body will do if it's a familiar program. However, the long-term impacts of me doing it the way I wanted to probably would just end me back where I started. So she's holding the projection of where I want to go because she knows the way. That's why I hired her. However, it got to a point where whatever she said to me, it actually didn't matter what she said to me. I started creating, and my mind started creating this epic story that she was manipulating me for her own benefit, or she was gaslighting me because maybe she'd said something wrong and she wasn't going to admit it. And, I promised myself I distorted something she said about not listening to my own body, where I turned it into not listening to my intuition, and I shouldn't listen to my body even though I should listen to my body. And I spent a whole day allowing my mind to create these epic stories and delete, distort, and generalize, and especially distort things that she was saying in great faith with the intention of where we were going. And I was putting them in the box of, she's gaslighting me like my past relationships did, or she's manipulating me because people have manipulated me in the past. And it's starting to sound a little bit like that, or I'm getting the feeling, because what was happening is I was getting uncomfortable. I was getting to layers of my own programming that my mind knows as safe. And I was getting to a point where I was going to change them. And when we get to that breaking point, it can get really uncomfortable and the mind will run wild. And I especially got stuck on, the being told not to listen to my body, or whatever it was that she said, which was meant something powerful from her end, but I turned it into being told not to listen to my intuition, even though I should. And at the end of this day, I really sat with it, and it was an exhausting day of overthinking. And it got to a point where I decided, look, I'm just going to keep paying her, but I'm not going to speak to her anymore, because this is not helping. And I feel unsafe, or I feel unseen, or whatever the story was that I was creating. And eventually it finally landed. It finally landed after all of that overthinking, that I was creating a story to stay in my problem. Because in the past, I've loved my problems, not consciously, but unconsciously, because problems were so familiar for me, especially health problems. And I also was getting secondary gain for having a health problem of some type at any stage of my life, especially for the last decade. And I'll speak on secondary gain next. That's our next concept for the day. But I was getting secondary gain for having this problem. I was getting nurture. I was getting attention. I was being told, oh, it's not my fault, and getting seen for having this problem. Except I didn't want the problem anymore. I don't want the problem anymore. And I had to start challenging this massive story I was creating in my own mind, and also challenge all the data that I'd learned up until this point of working with this coach, because I'd learned so much that we were going against. And I had to decide to trust. I had to decide to trust her, to trust myself, to trust that I was in the exact right place. And the reason why I was so adamant for a moment there that I wasn't going to listen to anyone who told me to go against my intuition, the reason I was so adamant that I wasn't going to continue working with her was because in the past, my intuition had told me to move, to leave, to do something, and I'd ignored it. And I'd promised myself I would never consciously do that again, because of the horrible things not listening to my intuition had led to in the past, in those relationships or situations. And I was mapping that into this situation and going, if I don't listen to my intuition, it's going to become a horrible outcome, just like all those times before. And then I realized something even greater, is that even if my intuition that I was deciding this was correct, and this beautiful health coach was working against me and didn't have my best intentions at heart and all these things, even if it led to a bad outcome, every single experience I had had up until this point, every situation you can imagine that ended in a bad outcome, perhaps because I went against my own intuition, were my biggest breakthrough moments ever. They were the moments that resolved my health issues. They were the moments that led me to creating a multi-six-figure business. They were the moments that led to my ultimate knowledge of healing. So even if I chose to do what she said and it worked out horribly, it would still work out well. And in the end, about 100 things landed for me. And it's a bit hard to put into words all of it. And especially because my particular health issue is the last kind of piece of the puzzle of a decade of health issues, most of which have been resolved. And this is just the last one to go. And it has to do a lot with parenting and relationships and all of the past. And it's almost impossible to explain in words how much came to the surface in the space of those couple of days where I was overthinking like a mad woman. And I recognized in the end that when I sat with all of those neuroses and when I allowed myself to slow down without going to my housemates, without turning to my family, being like, oh my God, I'm being controlled, like whatever it was, just sitting with it, with myself, and then going, wait, what knowledge do you have to move through this thought process right now? Can you choose to be safe? Can you choose to know that you're in the right place? And can you choose to take the action and trust the process, even when it doesn't feel great right now? And transform it into something better and communicate as well while that's happening. And I realized it was a beautiful way to practice for moving into any kind of relationship or partnership of any kind. And I know that's why I'm so grateful to my coaches and why a lot of my clients say the same about working with me. They get to use me as a practice partner or the person they go to before they go have a go at their partner. So second concept is secondary gain. And I'm going to ask a question. Think of your problem. Yeah, that problem. Now, what will you lose if you no longer had that problem? I'll say it again. What will you lose if you no longer have that problem? Think about it. So secondary gain means that we are gaining something from having the problem. Otherwise, we would more than happily dive headfirst into the solution, right? But we hesitate so much on the precipice of solutions, of happiness, of connection, of great relationships, because we're actually getting something. Our human needs are actually being met by having the problem, because the problem maybe has occurred all our life or many times over, and it's become familiar to our brain. And therefore, we're getting something from it. We're getting a level of certainty, or perhaps we're getting community and connection because we're hanging out with lots of other people who have problems and talk about them all the time. Perhaps we're getting recognition. There's a lot of communities that really encourage the victim mentality, whether it's the health communities or the relationship and dating communities, or you name it, the conspiracy theorist communities, like the them versus us communities feel great in the moment until you realize there's no actual end game for everyone to be happy and healthy and wealthy and all the things. But you get recognition from it, which is a human need. There's a level of identity that gets built around having that problem. It's a way to start conversations with people, which then means that we're more part of the tribe, especially if we gossip and we talk negatively about things, because it's the easiest thing for humans to relate on. And it's also a lot of the times proving the core limiting belief right. So there's an affirmation level that we're gaining from having the problem, because every single human has at some level a core belief that they're not good enough or they're not worthy. Even the worst among us on society standards have the same belief. And when we have problems, or when we have relationship breakdowns, or we lose all our money, we're just confirming and proving a limiting belief, which is, again, safety for the brain. And so when we can start to become aware of our secondary gain that we get from our problem, we can ask the question, do I want that? attention, recognition, identity, tribe, community, conversation? Or would I prefer to do things differently, heal my body, resolve my relationship challenges, make more money, create a great community around me, and experience that side of it? Because you get all of those things when you solve your problem as well. And I can tell you right now, they're much better tribes and communities and conversations, and you get the recognition that you get is next level. So, and at the end of the day, a lot of the times we will fight and argue for our excuses. We will fight and we will argue for our problem being so big that it's unsolvable. It's unlike anyone else's. And I've been that person. Except there is no problem that cannot be solved in some way, shape, or form. And so rather than fighting or arguing for our problems, because whatever we fight and argue for, we get to keep, because we're just solidifying the program. Can we ask ourselves, do we want to be right? Do we want to win the argument, or do we want to be happy? Do we want to be right, or do we want to be happy? Concept number 3, it's called perceptual positions. And this is something I use quite a lot in my private work with my clients. And it's deep work, and it's not for the faint of heart. And I'm going to use a really challenging example. So we're going to take an adult who knows that they were abused as a child. And by society standards, there's all the opinions about people who do that, people who receive that, and how things should be, and all the things. And I'm wondering if we could play around with an activity. So perhaps you weren't abused, perhaps you didn't have a horrible situation in your life, perhaps you did. And could you choose to play along with your specific challenge, trauma in mind? And so you are as you are now in the present day. And just for now, I'm going to get you to travel back in time to that pivotal experience. And so I'm going to use the example that I mentioned. So the adult now goes back to the child, drops into the body of the child, and goes, how am I feeling? Oh, I'm feeling confused, feeling a bit uncomfortable, feeling strange. And then we're going to actually imagine stepping out of the body of the child and stepping into the body of the adult, the parent, the other person in the situation. Perhaps it's the abuser or the person who hurt you. You're now them in that situation. You are fully associated as them. Now say how you're feeling as them. I am confused. I'm seeking love. I'm seeking connection. I'm wanting to insert some level of authority and wanting to show that I care, perhaps. And just for now, we're going to come back into the body of the child who's perhaps on the receiving end of whatever behavior it was. And as the child, or as you, you're going to ask, what's my highest intention for everyone in this moment? Well, my highest intention for me is that I'm supported and safe. My highest intention for this other person is that they're okay and that they're supported and safe. And then you're going to step back into the other person in the situation and ask the same question. You are them right now. What is your highest intention? Perhaps their highest intention was love, because that's what was modeled to them as a child. And this is their version of love. Perhaps their highest intention is connection. Perhaps their highest intention is to be powerful. Play around with what comes through as you do this, as you stand in both people's position and their perception of the situation, how they're feeling, and their highest intentions for everyone involved. Now you can come all the way back to the present day, drop into your body. You can do that anytime. And while it would be great if we lived in a world where children weren't abused, it would be great if we lived in a world where everyone just had perfect behavior. That's not how it works, because each individual human is, for the most part, working unconsciously off the programs that were handed to them, that were taught to them, that were imprinted onto them throughout their own childhood. And we can choose to hate and blame and shame, and wish horrible things on those that hurt. Except a lot of the time, their highest intention is quite beautiful. A lot of the time, people who abuse and hurt actually think that they're loving because that was their version of love that was taught to them. And that might challenge some people. And I hope that you choose to lean into it, because the only way to become completely free yourself, to transform your pain into power and purpose and your future being without that pain, is to find compassion, to find forgiveness. And perceptual positions, that activity, is a great way to get there. Number 4, loosening the grip. So I mentioned before that sometimes we will argue and fight for and cling to our problem because it's bigger than anyone else's, and it's so much more confusing and complicated than anyone else's. And just because that person solved their problem doesn't mean I can, because I've got all these extra obstacles. And we are gripping to keeping our problem, and we don't even realize it. And again, this was me in the past. This was me for a lot of this past year, even as I moved through so much change and released so many problems. We now joke in my communities that we then end up with not problems, because they're not actually problems. Our brain's just grasping for anything that looks or feels or sounds like a problem, because that's so familiar to us that it wants that, except we don't want that. So we get to keep looking at it, actually assessing it, and then going, where do I actually want to go? And what's the thing I could choose today? What's the story I could choose? And a great activity for this is creating a list of the people, the type of people that you want in your life. And so this can be great to utilize for when you're wanting to call in a partner, or when you're wanting to call in some new friends, or a great new job with great colleagues, to start to get clearer on who you'd like in your life. And you may have heard people talking about create a list of all the things you want in someone and then become that list. And I'll take it one further, is thinking about these qualities of people that you want in your life, and then asking yourself, what's on their list? What is on their list? Am I being all the things that that type of person who is kind, who is considerate, who is loyal, who is all these things, am I being what is on their list, what they're wanting to call in? And how can I become more of that? And how this relates to loosening your grip on your problems is, we're either driven to do things by just trying to get away from pain, just trying to get away from problems. So we keep looking for problems. The more we can get clear on where we'd like to go and the steps to get there, the more we start to be driven by passion and by excitement and by the affirmation of when we do something, we actually do call in someone really interesting, or someone beautiful, or someone kind. And then we start to get more momentum in that direction. And the best way to loosen the grip is to keep getting specific on where you want to go, who you want to meet and who you need to become in order to land in those relationships, in those situations, in those environments, and do something every single day that moves you towards that, rather than just unconsciously sitting through life and then allowing yourself to find problems in every single thing that anyone does or says, or the tone of voice that they use, or the way that they looked at you. Like, most of the time, it's not even about you, right? Number 5 is a question that I ask my clients all the time, and they love it. And that is sarcasm, because they don't usually love it. And I get it, because I was asked this question many times in my own journey of releasing my problems. And it's an interesting one. So again, think about a problem that you have, and then think about one of the reasons why you can't solve that problem. So perhaps you've been told that you have something called ADHD, which I've been told I have a couple of times. And you're given this label, and the person in the white coat says, this means you have these limitations, you're going to have these problems. And if you take this medication, you're probably going to have more problems, but you'll at least resolve like one little problem temporarily. And then if you don't take the medication, you might die. So you've just been laden with a bunch of rules around a label. And when people come to me, because this is what helped me transform my symptoms of ADHD into my superpowers that have created so many things, it's ridiculous at this stage. When I said, well, I have ADHD, I can't do that. It's really hard for me because I have ADHD. And I was asked this question, when did you decide that? I was like, what do you mean, when did I decide that? Like, I just have it. Like, I was told that I have it by a doctor. When did you decide that? When did you decide that that was what your problem is, and what your limitation is, and what your box is that you can't get out of? I'm like, oh, I decided it when the doctor told me, when they gave me the label and they told me I have all these limits. Cool. So you've decided that. That's when you decided to take on that story, to take on that program, to make that real for you. And then maybe you've told that story over and over again in your own mind. Oh my God, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. Then you say it out loud. Oh, I can't come to that because I have ADHD. I can't do that thing because I have ADHD. I'm just stacking a program. I'm hypnotizing myself with the fact that I am limited and I cannot do things. And when I change that program, when I change that story that I would tell inside my own head and out loud, things changed. I was able to focus more. I started connecting with people who are super successful and have ADHD. And they're like, oh yeah, you use it this way. We learn slightly differently. And so you just focus on this and then you do this and this is great. And I was like, oh, cool. And so I started doing that with a lot of things, with all the different labels that I was given by the medical world, or with all the different limitations that I decided to stack on top of myself over the years. I decided to find people who had had those challenges and overcome them, and I learned from them and I implemented the things that they did. And so whatever it is that you think is your limit, whatever it is that you think is the part of you that just can't change, and that's why you can't do or be or have the things that you want, I'd like to ask you, when did you decide that? When did you actually learn that? Because you didn't burst out of your mother's parts, however you came into this world, with these limiting beliefs, with these labels, with these decisions that you've decided to make for yourself that mean that you cannot be the limitless human being that you actually are. And when we change the story, we start to change what our brain finds evidence of, and everything can get to change, just like it has for my life. And we can form these intense opinions of literally just moments in our lives, like a moment in a doctor's office where I was told I have this label, this is all the problems I'm going to have, these are all the limitations I'm going to have. That was like a 5-minute interaction that impacted my life for a long time. And it was a story that I told about my life, and it was an opinion that I had for a while. And there's a beautiful line that a great guy called Govinda said on Twitter recently that I really love. Gwinder Bogle is a Substack, Twitter writer, all the things. And it's called Gwinder's Theory of Bespoke Bullshit. And it writes, quote, "Many don't have an opinion until they're asked for it, at which point they cobble together a viewpoint from whim and half-remembered hearsay before deciding that this 2-minute-old makeshift opinion will be their new hill to die on." And sometimes our opinions, the stories that we're telling about our lives, about ourselves, sometimes those have been formed on moments where we got a little bit of information, half-remembered hearsay, a 5-minute interaction with someone in a white coat who's supposed to know everything, and a lot of the times they don't. And I'm wondering if you could start to ask yourself, when did I decide that? Oh, that limiting thing that I said, that excuse that I just gave, when did I decide that that is my limit? When did I decide to define myself as that forever for the rest of my life, for the next 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years of my life? And am I going to be okay with that? When actually I know on some level that there is this whole arena of limitlessness that I could step into. There are solutions for any given problem, even if it's just changing how you feel about having the problem. Because as people like to jump in and argue at the stage, well, you can't grow back an arm if it's been chopped off. It's like, well, actually, people actually have been known to do this. And in the modern age, we're so cluttered with overthinking that the magic of the body will probably be pretty limited, and it's possible. And what if, even if you'd lost a limb that you could not get back, you decided to tell yourself every single day, I am limitless. I can find solutions for how this is making me feel that I don't like. Because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily about the problem itself. It's about how the problem is making us feel, and how the problem is maybe impacting our life and our relationships or our health. And all of that can be resolved. All of that can be transformed. And all of that is a choice. So I hope you found these interesting concepts as fascinating and fun as I have. It's been a bit of a wild and heavy conversation today. And if anyone has questions about them and how to apply them in your own life, then you can always feel free to reach out, grab any of the resources in the show notes, and connect with me if you have more questions, or if you have an interest of diving into these parts of yourself, so that you can have the beautiful transformation that is on the other side of changing those programs and those stories and those limiting beliefs and behaviors that perhaps have been keeping you stuck, and you don't need to be stuck anymore. If you like that episode, then make sure that you click here to check out some of the other conversations with my amazing guests and friends. And if you really liked it, you can click here to subscribe, so that you get notified each time a new episode goes up. And you can click down here to share it with your friends if there's something that they might also like to know. See you next time, lovely.